Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. How's it going? It's going pretty good. Guys have been watching the heck out of my video I just posted a second ago. So I appreciate that. Salamat and shukran and gracias and everything, the game I have for you guys right now is taken from round 10. They just got done with round 10. They're already in round 11. I'm not sure how many rounds they have total. I didn't even know they had a round 11 till I checked a second ago. I'm going to show you here what the, let me see here. Am I bringing it up? Okay, I got to get on the next page here. There we go. All right, cool. So that's the current standings right here. You see Wesley So's there in kind of like fourth-ish place. I mean, he's tied for second with all the rest of the guys, but he's doing pretty good so far. So I mean, if he can sneak out a win against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, he's looking pretty good here. So let me just hide that down a little bit. Bam, bam. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get started and see what we have here. And so this is the game Vidit Gujrathi versus Wesley So. So let's take a look here. All right, so we have D4 opening up. All right, so we have knight to F6, C4, E6. All right, so we have knight to F3, D5, and knight to C3. So we're getting into Queen's Gambit territory here. Like I always say, you can go into Queen's Gambit accepted, declined. You can go into the Slav. With the G3, you can go into, a Catalan type of situation. Usually, if you're gonna go into the Catalan, you're gonna go G3 before you go knight to C3, because you're gonna want to put Queen C2 and capture the pawn back with the Queen. All right, so we have Bishop to E7. All right, so we have Bishop to F4. All right, so we have castles. Bam. Okay. All right, so we have E3, knight B to D7. And so we have the Queen's Gambit decline, Harrwitz, and it's the two knights defense right here. It's typical development. We have this, you guys notice we have this bishop here outside the pawn chain. We're probably going to be, either developing our bishop here, and then we're getting castled and stuff. So, White's in a pretty good spot here at this point in the game here. All right, so we have, like I said, we have bishop to E2. All right, so we have D takes C4. And something you want to notice is, Black had the ability to take, this pawn, with D takes C4, for quite a few moves now. If you notice, so we had knight B to D7, and then, so Wesley So, allowed bishop to E2 to be played before he actually took on C4. Now you're gonna want to, sometimes you want to do that because it's gonna kind of waste the tempo for White. You never want to help your opponent. You never want to help your opponent develop his pieces and basically just help him beat you. So if he was to take this pawn at another point, it would allow the bishop to just come out immediately to C4 and just in one fell swoop. So, Wesley So wanted to wait until the bishop was developed, then take, and then it makes, it usually forces White to have to, make a second move. Just kind of wasting a little bit of a tempo. All right, so we have castles here, and so we have C5. Like I said, whenever you build up a pawn center, a nice little pawn center, the opponent is going to be trying to, attack that the best way you can. So, definitely C5 is a good way to, try to, cause an isolated pawn or any type of weaknesses, stuff like that. All right, so we have D takes C5. Gujrathi doesn't want any of that, isolated D pawn stuff. All right, so we have knight takes C5. And so now we have bishop takes C4. All right, so queen takes D1, rook F takes D1. And so like I'm always saying, guys, make sure you're noting exactly which rook took. It's a lot less of an issue with rooks It's usually a lot easier for you to figure out, you know, which one kind of moved at whatever point. But it definitely makes it a lot easier if you're noting it correctly. So like I said, this is going to be rook F to takes D1. All right, so we have B3, just getting this bishop prepared to come out. All right, so we have knight to E5. So just back up here real quick, one move. If you guys want to go ahead and pause the video real quick, like I showed you, knight to E5 was played in the game. But if you want to take a look at the position real quick and see what Gujrathi actually missed, you know, knight E5 was a legitimate move. But there was a much stronger move in the position right here. So like I said, if you want to pause it real quick and see if you can, you know, take a look and see if you can figure out what move was a little bit stronger here. We'll catch up with you in a second here. All right, cool. So for those of you that came up with bishop to D6, that's a sharp eye. You know, you're noticing that this bishop here is undefended. And, you know, there's definitely a problem with the bishop being pinned to this rook. You know, there's also problems, which isn't too real of a situation. If you were to take the knight here, you know, this pawn would take back and it would give black an isolated pawn. And so, you know, you have two ways to play this. One is kind of the only move. The other one is a possible move, but it's definitely a lot weaker in this position. So the strongest thing to do is just to take, you know, so it kind of forces a bishop trade. And so, you know, you'd have rook takes D6, you know, bishop to B7, and then actually just kind of forgetting, you know, your knight there on F3, it would be rook A to D1 in this position. So if you had something like bishop takes F3, G takes F3, and you know, yeah, you kind of damage your structure a little bit. Now you have 3 pawn islands. You know, you have the connected pawns here, you got the double pawns here, and you know, you have the isolated pawn here. But what you do have is nice control over these, you know, kind of jump squares for the knight. So you know, you're not in you know, this F pawn, even though it's doubled, is doing a lot of like good defensive work for your position, because you know, neither one of these knights have the ability to come into this square now. And so, you know, this rook is pretty solid on the square now, because, you know, of course, if you had a knight being able to come into, you know, this square, you might have a trade and stuff like that. This knight can come, you know, the next knight can come in, you know, you're going to have kind of an issue with your rook, you know, kind of being on that square. But, you know, your rook's pretty much able to live on this square, or, you know, for a while here. All right. And so the other let me go here. Sorry. The other move, really the only other move to play, would be rook to E8. If you didn't, you know, want to automatically trade the bishops, it'd be to, you know, move the rook over here, just kind of unpin the bishop to the rook. But, you know, as you guys will see in a second here, this is not quite the best continuation. So we'd have bishop takes E7, you know, rook takes E7, and then we have the rook penetration on D8. So, you know, logically, you probably want to go ahead and move that rook back to E8. And so you have rook A to D1 swinging over. So you'd have bishop to D7, rook takes A8, rook takes A8, and then you'd see rook to D4. And so, you know, just like how the pawn was doing in the previous position, you know, you have this this rook and this knight, you know, coming together to make sure that we can't just be jumping in this square, because, you know, it's in this position, the fight is for this square, because you have both knights, you know, kind of trained on that square. So you definitely want to defend it here. All right, so going back to what was actually played in the game, like I said, knight to E5 was actually played in the game. You know, just trying to see if you can eyeball this C6 square a little bit, you know. All right, so we have bishop to B7. All right, so we have F3. And, you know, like I said before, just making sure that we don't have any knight jumps coming in and stuff like that. And, all right, so we have knight to H5, and this is actually the novelty of the game. This is the first time this has been seen. Rook F to D8 has been seen 2 separate times. But like I said, knight to H5 hasn't been seen. And it's a pretty simple threat. I mean, you know, you wanted to try to take here so that you can double, you know, white's pawns, or force him to move bishop back. And then in that case, you know, you'll, you know, double his pawns and stuff like that. So it's pretty straightforward threat here. All right, so we have B4, trying to get, you know, their own little counter attack going. All right, so knight to A6, and we have A3. All right, so knight to B8. rook a to c1. And so, you know, as you can see with white's, you know, rooks, you know, they're pretty much taking over the C and D file. You know, that's what you want to do when you have your rooks. You know, you want to try to put them on, you know, either half open or open files, so that you can maximize the effectiveness of them and stuff. So, all right, so we have G5, just knocking that bishop back. So we have bishop to G3. All right, so knight takes G3. And so we have H takes G3. And so we have the knight redirected around to C6. All right, so bishop to A6. That's a cute little move. You know, trying to knock the bishop away so you can, you know, win this knight here. Well, not win the knight, but, you know, just kind of get a favorable trade. You know, you knock the bishop off the diagonal. You know, you hit the hit this knight, and then you're hitting the bishop as well. So, so we see knight takes E5, and bishop takes B7. So Wesley So didn't really like that, you know, variation. And, you know, he's trying to, you know, activate his knight. And so so we have rook A to D8. All right, so bishop back to A6. All right, so knight back to D7. All right, so we have king F2. So we're more towards the end game now. So, you know, the queens are off the board. You know, we have, you know, a set of pieces exchanged off. So, you know, we're minimizing our pieces and stuff here. So, you know, you definitely want to try to come up and, you know, get your king involved and everything. So, all right, so we have knight to B8. Asking that bishop what it wants to do. So we have bishop back to E2. All right, so we have A5. All right, so knight to A4. A little, you know, in-betweener, zwitch and zug move. All right, so pawn takes B4, pawn takes B4, and we have bishop takes B4. So knight takes B6. So as you can see, I mean, we pretty much have all our queen side pieces liquidated as far as pawns and stuff like that go. And so, you know, we're pretty much just kind of stuck here as far as pawns are concerned on the king side. All right, so bishop back to E7. All right, rook takes D8, bishop takes D8. All right, knight to C4. All right, knight to D7. All right, so we have F4, G6. You know, you definitely don't want to try to, you know, go into this trade here because you're just going to help, you know, you're going to help white fix their pawn structure. Right now, I mean, it's fairly even, but, you know, white has the, you know, white has the harder pawn structure to deal with. It's not that it's impossible, but it's just that it's a little bit harder. It just requires a little bit more defense. So it's like, you know, you want to try to keep your opponent as weak as possible. So H6 is, you know, something good. Because, you know, of course, if you have something like this, you take back and you have a nice healthy pawn, you know, pawn trio. And then, you know, you have, you know, white's going to have like double pawns here and an isolated pawn here. So, you know, of course, white's not going to go into that here. So, so we have bishop to F3. All right, so bishop to F6. All right, so knight to D6. Bishop back to E7. So we just go on the counter attack with rook to C7. All right, so we have bishop takes D6. Rook takes D7. Bishop to C5. Bishop to H5. Just, you know, trying to hold this king down to the protection of this pawn here on F7. All right, so we get rid of that threat with that 5. So rook to C7. Rook to D6. Rook to D7, bishop to C5. Now, you guys remember what I was talking about before as far as, you know, you kind of shuffling back and forth. You know, these guys are playing a 15-minute and with 10-second increment game. You know, just for the purposes of being able to think, you know, they probably want to shuffle back and forth in some positions to try to gain some, you know, a little bit of time on their clock so that they don't, you know, get into time trouble and stuff like that. So, so we have king to E2. All right, so rook to B8. Trying to activate that rook. So we have bishop to F7 with check. So king to H8. And bishop takes E6. All right, so rook over to E8. You know, just exploiting the pin here on this this pawn with the bishops, you know, eyeballing it as well. So we have bishop takes F5. Rook takes E3. King to F1. You know, you want to make sure that you're not doing, you know, you're not doing this here. Because doing this here is going to drop an entire piece. After that, you know, after that that discovered attack, you know, some people, you know, that might have been thinking, well, I gotta try to, you know, protect this pawn, but you know, protecting that pawn is gonna come at a pretty steep price here. So, you know, king F1 avoids all of that. All right, so we have rook takes G3. All right, F takes G5, rook takes G5, and we have G4. All right, so we have H5. All right, so we have rook to H7 with check, king to G8, rook takes h5, rook takes h5, g takes h5. And so we have king to g7. And it is here that the players actually agree to a draw. It might seem kind of strange because, you know, you're thinking like, wait a minute, like, I mean, you have a pawn to the good, and you know, you have a bishop, so it's like, you know, if you can maybe trade the, you know, well, you can't trade the bishop, but you know, if you can get into a position where you can try to queen this pawn, you should be able to win, right? Well, there are a couple things in this position that you have to think about, take into account. The first thing is this pawn is a rook pawn. Now, as a lot of you guys know who study endgames, are familiar with, anytime you have you get into an endgame where you have a rook pawn, there are a special set of rules that you know, go along with having a rook pawn, and you know, rook pawns are notorious for being very, very drawn. You know, if you have a king and a pawn versus a king and it's a rook pawn, it's an automatic draw, unless this person just says, hey, I'm just going to take a vacation, just walk this way, and you can get your king in a position, and you know, your pawn in the, you know, your queen in the pawn. That's the only way you'll be able to win that type of position. But they're theoretically drawing games. So just to give you guys kind of like a sample variation of what, you know, can occur. Also, too, something you want to notice is there's opposite colored bishops. And so, you know, usually when you get into an endgame where you have a couple of pawns each and you have opposite colored bishops, those positions are very, very drawn as well. So just to give you guys kind of like a sample variation as to like kind of what it would look like, you know, if you were to try to play this out, and I'll be able to show you the reason why they, you know, they just went ahead and agreed to a draw, because, you know, intermediate to high level players can just visualize, look at this and just be like, oh, this is a draw. Let's go ahead and just, you know, shake hands and go ahead and go home. All right, so, you know, if we have something like, let's say, bishop to g6, and, you know, this is just a sample variation. There are, like, literally dozens of different ways that each side can play. The most important thing, just to back up real quick, the most important thing you want to remember if you are on the defending side of this is these 4 squares is your home. The specific name of this actual endgame is, you know, the wrong rook pawn. And so basically what you're looking at is you have the bishop that does not have influence over the dark squares. And so this king is basically going to be able to shuffle back and forth between g7 and h8, and this bishop can never kick it out. And so if we were to like take this pawn and move it over here, then that's a completely different story, because it's the right rook pawn. So then that means that this pawn can, you know, this bishop has the influence on this, you know, pawn going to the corner. And so, like I said, just as a little sample variation to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So we might have bishop g6, and I mean, black can even give away the bishop completely. That's how drawn the position is, even with, you know, giving away a piece. So, you know, you'd have king takes g1, you know, king to h6, king to g2, trying to make the march up, you know, king to g7, king to g3, you know, king to h8. So you push pawn to h6. All right, so we have king to g8. We have king to g4. And so like I was saying before, you know, basically the king is just making sure it stays in that in the corner of the board in those 4 squares. So, you know, rook to king to f5, king to g8. You might have something like h7 check. You know, king to h8, king to g5, king to g7, king to h5, king to h8. And then, of course, you know, if you move king to h6, that'd be a draw. And so, like I said before, you know, this king basically just needed to go back and forth between these squares, and it can never be kicked out. And the king can never come close, even if you, in this position here, even if you were to come over here, you know, that would be, if you were to come up, you know, that would be a stalemate as well, because, you know, you can see the king doesn't have any legal moves to make. So, all right, that is that game, guys. And that is taken from round 10. Tomorrow when I get a chance, I'll be doing, I'll see if I can do round 11, and if there's a round 12, see if Wesley can sneak out a win or 2 here. But I appreciate you guys coming through, and go ahead and subscribe and like and comment. Let me know how you like the layout that I made and stuff like that. And, you know, I will see you guys next time. I appreciate it.